And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Ooligan is known as the savior fish because it is often the first food fish to arrive after winter. It can be eaten fresh or dried, but is most known for the nutrient-rich oil that is rendered from the fish. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1991.
Although Oulacan is funding the $160,000 investigation, it came about because of the long-standing complaints by the Haisla about having to abandon Oulacan harvesting in the Kitimat.
Originally, we've been directed by BC Ministry of Environment to conduct some form of study, and the general guidelines were provided by BC Environment. And then work has proceeded with selection of consultants, consultation with consultants of the Haisla, and consultation of Federal Ministry of Environment to develop, and the selected beak consulting group for their expertise to do probably the most sophisticated study of a migratory fish in history.
And the results of the study may be used to make further alterations or improvements to effluent discharges from the pulp mill.
Well, obviously it will be directed to that. The form of the experiment and the results would be usable in determining how to modify our methods of operation, the perhaps adjustments to specific processes, or which processes would have the most key effect on any flavor impairment of such a species.
Part of the investigation will determine whether improvements in effluent discharges have made a difference.
It certainly ties in with the expansion, which approximately 10% of the expenditure, or $12 million, went into upgrading our effluent treatment facilities and the processes in the plant. So that now is a good time to see the effects of meeting A level in the Kitimat region, which may be different than what is required elsewhere.
Prior to the start of the investigation, tests were carried out to determine how mill effluent is dispersed in the Kitimat River.
What happened is, before we were able to catch the Ooligan, before they came into the river, what we did is we added a red dye to the effluent and monitored then the distribution of that effluent down the river as it approached to the saltwater chuck. And being able to monitor the various concentrations in the river, we will be able to relate that to the dilutions and the exposures that the fish undergo here in this experiment.
The pulp mill has one discharge site into the river.
Oulacan has one outfall where we discharge treated wastewater back into the river, and of course it goes through not only a primary treatment facility, but it also goes through a 5-day aeration lagoon to break down the constituents then that may pose problems to the receiving river water environment.
And there are several stages in the study.
Once we have gone through this dispersion study, which we've already completed, and we've exposed the fish to the various concentrations, we'll be able to relate then to determine if there are any zones in the Kitimat River which could contribute then to fish flavor impairment. And how we're going to do that then is we have fish exposed to various concentrations of effluent. They will then be sacrificed, and they will then be presented to a group of panelists, half of which will be represented by the Kitimat Village Council, half of which will be coming from the community, and one Ministry of Environment representative will be on the panel. And they will be presented with various different fishes and asked to grade the fish for flavor.
One can always tell when the Oulacan are in the Kitimat River by the clouds of seagulls that come down to feed. but the fish used in the study were caught in the Camano River to make sure they had traveled through very unpolluted waters.
Well, we wanted to get a source of fish that was recognized and identified as desirable by the Haisla, who, of course, fish for this species and use it quite extensively. So we wanted a quality of animal that we knew would be accepted for a control.
The Ooligan were caught near Camano by Haisla fishermen and helicoptered to the testing site at Oulacan. The dispersion studies confirm the fish should be exposed to concentrations of between 1 and 10% of effluent in river water. The consulting firm which did the investigation has lots of experience in the field.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Affluent discharge is sometimes referred as wastewater. It's liquid waste produced and discharged by any industrial or commercial premises, such as food processing factory or manufacturing business. Let us return to the archives with Gordon Craig.
We've done this sort of work very actively for the last 7 years, almost 8 years, and it's fairly conventional for intensive environmental assessment studies. It is very rigorous because it's important to control the conditions and simulate the environmental receiving area as best possible, and yet maintain some control over the situation so that some quantitative assessments can be made in the final analysis. It's just one approach and generally one factor in a complex study.
Trout as well as Oulacan were tested.
The trout were selected as a representative salmonid species because the Kitimat River is used for a migration of many fish species and predominantly salmonids. We felt it was important, and indeed the Department of Environment or Ministry of Environment for BC was also concerned that that species be represented. The Ooligan is a migratory species that arrives for a relatively short period of time for the period of the year, as much as a month, but typically several weeks. So it was important to also cover off a species that was in the river system more of the time.
Some tests were also done to determine whether the fish are either attracted to or repelled by the discharges from the pulp mill.
This is an avoidance chamber which we've constructed to follow some designs which have been published in the scientific literature and appear to work fairly well. We've tested it, and it does indeed give us the kind of flow separation we're looking for. What we do is hold a number of fish in the apparatus. We repeat the exposure to each concentration a number of times, and then we end up with a population of data which allows us to identify whether the Ooligan under these test conditions tend to either prefer or avoid the various concentrations, and again identify the threshold concentration that induces either preference or avoidance for the effluent. The other aspects of it are combining the different components of the study, the fish exposure to different times and concentrations, the tasting evaluation of the fish, and integration of those results with avoidance reactions as a behavioral response.
Historically, the Ooligan harvest has been very important to the Haisla people.
It's been said by a lot of people that the Ooligan is not a commercial species. Well, that might be so in the contemporary sense, but for many years our people harvested not only for their own use, but for trade and barter up and down the coast, and continue to do so up to this point. To give an indication of how much our people relied on the Kitimat River at one point, by our estimates, at some point in the past, our people used anywhere up to 2,300 ton of Ooligan in one season. That's, in my estimation, that's quite a bit of Ooligan. And it was used for our own purpose through putting it up by smoking it, rendering it into Oulacan oil, fresh. I mean, you name it. It was eaten and preserved for future use. Perhaps the most important aspect of the Oulacan, though, was the rendering of it down into grease, which was used by our own people, but again bartered up and down the coast from Alaska all the way down to the Washington state with the people on the coast of that state.
The first problems with the Ooligan harvest showed up when Kitimat was built and nets were contaminated by untreated sewage from Kitimat. When the municipality installed sewage treatment facilities, the situation improved. But the Haisla gave up all attempts to harvest the fish after Oulacan started discharging effluent into the Kitimat River. The Haisla still have some concerns about the study.
The community of the Haisla people have impacted somewhat the terms of reference, if you will, for the study. I think we've heard also that there's a lot of money being spent by Oulacan in his efforts to clean up, and that's commendable. I don't berate Oulacan for that, but I find it difficult to begin to have my optimism lifted to a level that is going to allow me to tell our people to go back fishing in the Kitimat River. I for one can't visualize, I can't even begin to comprehend the amount of, if you want to put it in a dollar figure, what it would cost if you wanted to try and quantify what our people have lost.
The next step in the process was the taste testing of the Oulacan by a panel of volunteers, half of whom came from Kitimat and half from the Haisla of Kitimat village. The Oulacan were first cooked under controlled conditions.
We're serving 4 samples of fish each time in the panel, and each time there's a serving made. We have to have 4 separate pans for each sample of fish. They're all labeled individually for each of the samples that we're serving each time. They're all heated for the same amount of time. The fish are put in for 4 minutes total cooking time, 2 minutes each side, timed. And at the end of the cooking period, we're also measuring the temperature to see that it's up to the same temperature for all of them too.
And there were procedures to make sure the samples were served in such a way that no one could tell from which batch of Oulacan they came.
Well, first of all, the samples, when we collected them, they were frozen, and at that time they were all coded with randomly generated 3-digit numbers. We then take those samples out of the freezer the night before, put them in the refrigerator to thaw overnight, and as you saw in the kitchen, all the utensils, the cups and everything that are used have those same numbers on them. Therefore, the people who are cooking the fish, people who are tasting the fish, and the servers do not know exactly what treatment we are serving at any particular time, so all samples are treated equally.
Most of the testers found the participation in the experiment very worthwhile.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's worth it. Maybe this is, maybe they'll get some results out of this that'll change the system a bit. Maybe other pulp mills will get involved in the same kind of testing.
Before Kitimat was developed, the entire community from Kitimat village would move to the banks of the river to harvest the Oulacan.
We used to go up here, our Kitimat River. When I first went up here, well, that was my first year of marriage. We went up here, and we had no children then, and we preserved 10 barrels of Oulacan grease at a time.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. British Columbia has the most certified forest land than any other jurisdiction in the world, with the exception of Canada as a whole, demonstrating its committed world-class sustainable forest management. Let us return to the archives to bring you this story about Red Sand Lake.
There was a time that the forest industry didn't see the need to tell us much about what they were doing with, or to, our forest lands, and few of us were asking. Thanks largely to the work of environmentalists, those days are gone. We're taking a much closer look at the vast areas of clear-cuts that can be found all over BC. And the forest companies are intent on telling their story. that they are taking care of the forests and that their modern forest practices can harmonize with the environment.
I agree with you. In the past, foresters have been guilty for going about their practice, their work, and not telling anyone about it. And on the other side of the coin, the public, I don't know if they were not interested, but they just didn't know. And now the public is very interested. They're interested in what's going on in their backyard, especially in our area. People of terrace, they use the area for hunting, fishing, hiking, what have you. And now they want to know what's going on. So as a professional forester, we're trying to inform the people what's taking place, what practices of forestry, right from, I guess, every phase of it, from logging right through to silviculture and stand tending. So we're trying to do our bit to inform the people.
Archie McDonald was one of several representatives of Skeena Cellulose and Skeena Sawmills who joined Forest Ministry personnel in acting as tour guides during the May opening of the Red Sand Lake Demonstration Forest. Located at the southwestern tip of Kitsum-Kalem Lake, the Red Sand Lake Recreation Area is just across the river from a provincial park and from active logging areas. Also conducting the May tour of school children through the demonstration forest was a group called Canadian Women in Timber, a relative newcomer to the scene.
Canadian Women in Timber was started about 2 years ago in Vancouver as a sort of a reaction to some of the preservationist groups that were coming out. And our idea, or our main goal is through education to educate people about the forest industry and to sort of say there is a way to, there's a wise way to use our resources for the benefit of all, that we can have a healthy environment and a healthy economy at the same time.
Her group gears many of its activities towards school children.
Right now we're starting to get involved in things through the school. We were involved, very involved with the science fair with different sort of forestry projects, tree counting, that type of thing. We were involved in getting Mr. Kimmins to come up and talk to us on the impacts of clear cutting, and we've been involved in basically educating our members as well, because a lot of our members have nothing to do with the forest industry and they need to know what it's all about as well.
As noted, Wood's group helped organize the March visit to the Northwest of Dr. Hamish Kimmins, the well-known forest ecology professor from the University of British Columbia. During that visit, Dr. Kimmins toured many logging areas of the Northwest and addressed audiences in Houston, Smithers, the Hazeltons, and Terrace. And to the disappointment of some environmentalists in the area, he refused to condemn outright the practice of clear-cut logging. As for the Red Sand Lake Forest, the ministry insists that it's more than simply a public relations exercise on behalf of it and the sawmills.
First of all, we'd like to be able to show some of the different ecosystems that exist in our forests, demonstrate some of the management techniques that are commonly used in forestry today, to provide for recreation for the public. We have the the Red Sand Recreation Site here. The demonstration forest will help enhance that by giving the public an opportunity to go out and walk on the trails and see some of the different things and some of the activities that take place in our forest.
Work on the main trail, which is 1.6 kilometers long, was begun last year by local Corrections Canada inmates. It's indicated in green on this map. Later this year, it'll be covered with gravel to make it wheelchair accessible. Meanwhile, a trail to Lookout Hill, marked in blue, and another trail, marked here in pink and stretching all the way up to Kitsum-Kalem Lake, are being carved out by social assistance recipients. Across Kitsum-Kalem River is Goat Creek Provincial Park, which you can get to by the paved Nishka Highway. Among the projects being considered in the future is a footbridge linking the park with the demonstration forest. The Red Sand Lake area was parkland itself a few years ago.
In 1987, we took this site over from BC Parks, and the site wasn't getting used as much as Parks had hoped. and they felt it was more appropriate that it would fall under the Ministry of Forests recreation mandate.
Now, how many people do you imagine from the terrace area, or even tourists from outside the area, will actually be able to get up here and look at this? Do you think it's going to be popular?
I think it will be, and I think particularly with the demonstration forest here and the hiking trails, I think just the recreational aspect will be quite important and will generate a lot of interest.
Red Sand Lake is located 26 kilometers up the West Calum Road, which is just west of Terrace.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Newsprint is one of the most well-established recyclable commodities in British Columbia and around the world. Newspaper has become the original background of residential recycling programs and drove the establishment of the Blue Box bag recycling system in BC. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to archives to look at recycled newspapers.
Working with municipalities and networks of dealers, community collection programs across Canada remove more than 330,000 tons of old newspapers from the waste stream in 1990. But the story doesn't end at the curb. In 1990, only one Canadian mill used de-inked waste paper to produce newsprint. It was located in southern Ontario. This mill uses a de-inking process called flotation. A wet pulp mix containing newspaper, coated paper, water, soap, lime, and hydrogen peroxide passes into the flotation cell, where it goes through 7 chambers. Air is forced into the bottom of the cells, and bubbles coated with the soap, ink, and excess clay from the coated paper float to the surface. This surface material is skimmed off and sent to a waste treatment plant. The ink and other contaminants are removed, and the cleansed water is recycled back through the system. The non-toxic residue left over from the process is taken away by local members of the Agricultural Society for use as a soil conditioner fertilizer. Today, newsprint produced at this mill contains 62% recycled paper, compared with 25% in 1981.
The Canadian pulp and paper industry has been listening to Canadians, and we share their concerns. We are committed to recycling. Today, of all the paper produced in Canada for consumption in Canada, about 20% of the material used comes from waste paper. And by 1993, this number will grow to 50%. In newsprint production alone, in the last 2 years, our industry has committed $1 billion to convert old newspapers into newsprint. And by 1993, 13 additional mills will be equipped with de-inking facilities to produce from old newspapers and old magazines newsprint. The Canadian Pulp and Paper Association and its members believe in responsible stewardship of our forests. The Canadian forest industry is a world-class leader, and Canadians recognize the importance of that position, but not at the expense of our environment, and we agree.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.